And we're live. My name is Nathan Polsky. I'm here today with Jacob Bradley and David Roberson. We are doing the Libertarian Party of Texas 2024 candidate interviews. We've done a few so far. David's our guinea pig tonight, and we've got some more coming up later on. So the strategy here is we got a few questions we'll just go through. We'll keep it a little bit conversational, and then towards the end we'll just see if there's any more feedback. So starting off, David, who are you and what are you running for?
Sure. My name is David Robertson. I'm the Secretary of Travis County LP. I've been a practicing lawyer in Texas for the past 14 years, and I'm running for Texas Supreme Court, place 6. It's an opportunity that I took on for the purposes of utilizing my law degree and my certification. The Texas Supreme Court race is one of the only ones that requires more certification than just signing up and paying the fee. And I felt my skill set could be a benefit to the party and to Texas by running in for that race.
Great. So Texas Supreme Court, that's a pretty high up there position. What inspired you to do that?
So interestingly enough, I've been politically active since I was very young. Yeah, 8 years old. I went to the Clinton inauguration. I grew up outside of D.C. for the record. Went to the Clinton inauguration, and being in D.C., in the D.C. area, you have a lot of political things happening all around you. So something kind of becomes second nature. And when I decided I wanted to become a lawyer in middle school, I started researching constitutional law, especially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as you look into the actual law of things, you're considering the judicial branch of government is really where legislation comes to die, or comes to get cut down or narrowed or rejected, right? And it's really the settling point, the decision point, if you will, after all the legislation has gone through, the executive branch has had their say, and it's really where the real world and legislation interact mostly. And interestingly enough, in my first college class, college political science class, the professor ended up putting at the end of the class, put up a list of names, of titles rather: citizen, judge, justice. And me at 18, I walk up there and put my name, Justice Robertson, right? Because of my internal interest in the law and how it had shaped how our society worked. So from there, it's been an ongoing involvement in politics, and then being in Austin, District 49 is 84% blue,
Mm-hmm.
right? I got my 2.1% of the vote, but I think that my skill set, my certifications would be more useful in a statewide race, not only for ballot access for us, but also for my aspirations, and also my interests on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
I still consider myself a amateur scholar of constitutional law, and especially how it propped up recently with First Amendment issues, with the protests here in
Mm-hmm.
Austin and around the country. And so it's been a situation where it opened up as something that would be beneficial for the party's interests, but also suited my skill set, as well as being sort of an opportunity to put your name on the ballot, put my name on the ballot, in pursuit of that idea I had when I was 18 years old in community college, right? Now, obviously, it's a pretty high up position, and you know, there are the incumbent is you've got a lot of experience on her side, um, but there's my the passion that I have for the issues that are overarching in the judicial system is more important than uh, than perhaps the representative side. So I think
Mm-hmm.
my skills and my interests are better suited to this race, especially.
Great.
Uh, I have a question for you. Can you outline some of your key priorities or platform issues for your campaign this time around?
Sure. So a judicial campaign is much different than a representative campaign or a legislature campaign, because with a judicial campaign, you're getting into a position where you're the third prong of government, right? And your considerations there are going to be related to how these particular cases that are brought up through the court system, from county court to district court, all the way up to the Supreme Court viewpoints. So you're looking at a more circumspect approach to the application of principles of law. So things that I feel strongly about are the absolute right to free speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
The protections of that within the boundaries of the law, obviously. And you talk about the different applications of types of speech, of protected classes, of public forums or semi-public forums. But I think free speech is absolute. I mean, that's why it's the First Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second, is the second most important one, arguably, with the right to carry and the right to bear arms, right? And I think that a lot of those things interact, especially when we saw the issues with the protests in the prior years, where folks were carrying weapons and shooting each other and causing loss of life. And the question of the interaction of, is it demonstrative speech? Is it and free exercise of saying, or should there be limitations with the underpinning moral issues and societal issues of violence and death being tragic events, right? And then one other thing that is a big deal for me is Fourth Amendment issues, right? Especially the freedom to, whether it's grow what you want to grow or do what you want to do with your personal property, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing a lot of work with the Texas Game Fowl Breeders Association and the U.S. Vaping Association, in a pro bono capacity as a lawyer, and helping them fight against some oppressive rules and regulations that restrict what they can do with their animals and what they can do with their own development of products that where the FDA has been overreaching. So I think that those three pieces are probably the key things that really I bang my drum for.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been out to a couple of the Game Fowl Association events. It's a lot of nice people that are being oppressed by the government right now. So
Right.
thank you for doing
It
that.
was it was interesting. I was speaking to about 3 or 4 thousand of them in Houston recently, and the line that caught the MC's attention was, libertarians stand for the right to do the stand for the right to do what you want with your property, on your
Mm-hmm.
property, as long as you're not hurting anybody else's.
Right.
And he actually grabbed the mic from me and had me repeat it, and then repeated it in Spanish so that everybody knew it was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you said you're running against an incumbent, and they have a lot of experience. Is it just the incumbent that you're running against, or is there a third candidate? And what sets you apart from them?
Sure. So there is a third part. There is a third. Uh, it's a three-way race.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats were allegedly gonna back off of place six, but they as they usually do jumped in.
Mm-hmm.
I did pick place six over place four because place four is actually a justice that I had practiced in front of when he was in district court in Harris County, and as you say, he's actually personal friends with one of my cousins, so uh, he found it pretty interesting that I was in the mix. But as far as the current incumbent, she's got a lot of experience in viewing these cases and making rulings and so on and so forth. But that's not dispositive. That doesn't mean that just because you've been just because you've been doing it the
Mm-hmm.
whole time doesn't mean you're necessarily the most perceptive person to look at these. And I think that fresh eyes um, on in that position can be very effective, and especially if you think about the folks that are coming into voting age now. You're looking at college students and
Mm-hmm.
really the younger generation becoming much more activated. I think that having a bunch of old fogies, no offense to any of the guys on the court, having a bunch of older folks that have been there forever, um, it does a disservice to the perceptions and the practices of the court. I mean, you look at court as sort of a temperature taking of the society that it governs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be a reflection of changes in morality and changes of opinions on social issues. Those need to not be uh, dispositive of any decisions, but they do need to be a persuasive consideration to reflect the parameters and the circumstances surrounding the actual legal issues and the legal laws. And is this law still uh, valuable? Does it still do a valuable function, or is it overreaching, which many are, or is it not serving the purpose of what it was originally intended to, or has it been codified to death to a point where it is now maladapted to the situation that the state is seeking to enforce in those particular instances. And so a fresh perspective on how these laws are actually interacting with society is a good thing.
So, hot topic issue right now across the nation are these protests that you mentioned. And I know Governor Abbott has made some, I believe he signed some laws into effect regarding those here in Texas. What's your perspective on that? And when you get elected to the courts here in Texas, how do you plan on responding to those?
So on principle, I would tend to avoid becoming what we would describe as an activist judge,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the place of a judge is to have things, a justice is to have things presented to them
Mm-hmm.
in camera, and for them, for me or us to then apply the law as it stands
Mm-hmm.
to the best of our ability with the current state of affairs as far as precedent and so on. I will say personally, um, as a free speech advocate, that I think that you have to really get into the nitty gritty of how it all works together. For example, if you're standing on the corner of a public street and you say something hateful towards a protected class, that's fine. Now, if you're in a semi public forum like UT's campus, which has its own ordinances voted on by its managers and faculty, and you are also you doing that same what we would call hate speech towards a particular race or religion, you're now under what's called strict scrutiny, right? And so you're looking at everything that you do in support of or into facilitation of that speech has to be above the board, has to be above board, has to be spotless, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you've broken an ordinance and doing hate and speaking perhaps would be considered hate speech,
Mm-hmm.
you've now you're outside of the umbrella of protection because you've broken a law whilst speaking in that fashion. So it's a very fine line to tread, and I think that the purpose of the role of a justice in that situation would be to provide context and clarity,
Mm-hmm.
and even perhaps education to the populace in general, but also the folks that are watching these sorts of issues and rightly being in an uproar. So it's not so much of a uh, as it would be a pitting against Governor Abbott, but more
Mm-hmm.
of a let me use my education, let me use my knowledge, my perception, and perspective to flesh out why this is important and where it could be better and why it is where it is now.
So you've kind of led into my next question a little bit with some of your answers there. But what are some of the experiences or knowledge that you've gained as your time uh, in your career that would kind of lend itself to just the skills, things like that, that would easily fall into place if you were elected?
Sure. So for the first 4 years of my legal career, I was a civil litigator in complex civil matters in Harris County, and so became very familiar with the process of the technical process and the procedural process of how a case factually gets through the court system and procedurally what levers can be pulled, what motions can be filed, and so on and so forth. So that allows you to understand the framework of how did this particular issue get to get to this level, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
going through several levels of the judicial system before you get to the Supreme Court, right? Um, and also with that understanding of my continued practice, you keep track of sort of the precedential cases, the cases that have come and stated certain things, and that have then been expanded, narrowed, overturned, etc. Right, and that's been something that I maintain myself as part of my political involvement and my own interests as far as the constitutional law pieces are concerned. Um, so, for example, um, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a big deal up on the national level, the federal level, and the juxtaposition there is: was it legally a bad case? Was it properly overturned? But then also, what was the effect of that overturning, right? Um, and for me, again, that goes back to the what is legal is not always what's right, but what is right is subjective to some in some
Mm-hmm.
situations, right? So for me, while I personally think that a woman's right to choose is an individual right that has to be protected, I would never personally, you know, participate in that sort of activity. That's for them, not for me, right? Um, but what happened is Roe v. Wade was essentially a very flimsy case because of the way it was pushed through the court system, with the plaintiff being, actually not even actually having an abortion, right? She ended
Mm-hmm.
up raising the child. Um, and the fact that it was pushed up through the court system without legislative underpinnings, it was very weak, and that's how it was able to be overturned, recently. Now the problem is the effect of that then trickles down to where you have Arizona's situation, where they had some law from the 1800s that was then activated because of this being overturned, right? So we have to bear in mind very clearly the legal ramifications and the real world ramifications of any decision, any ruling that's made on issues that tear at the social fabric of America, like abortion, gun rights, free speech.
Mm-hmm. Um, how do you plan on to ensure that transparency and accountability is being upheld uh, when elected?
So as an elected official, your duty is to the people who elected you.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Right. And I think that the more people are involved in both the process of election as well as the process of governance, the better.
Mm-hmm.
In my college years, my honors thesis, my capstone thesis, was on the subject of active democracy, right? And in the words of the preamble to the Constitution, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
so that a government by the people, for the people, and of the people should not perish from the earth, right? And so, what my thesis was essentially is if a government stops being by the people, it stops being for the people almost immediately,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we see that played out in special interests. We see that played out in activist judges, et cetera, et cetera. As far as me personally concerned, I think that having a interactive, as much as possible, uh, mechanism for amicus curiae briefs, which is friend of the court, so that that door is known to be open for groups that want to supply that briefing to provide a different perspective on an unsettling or divisive issue that may have arisen. In a similar way, I think that the issues that we're seeing on the federal level with folks like Justice Thomas or Justice Sotomayor, with those, the accepting of donations and trips and so on and so forth. I think that is, you need to avoid even the appearance of evil when you're a justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that having, open records on that is absolutely essential. I think that having a more congenial relationship with the media, so that they're not just running around reporting what they think you're saying, being more direct with what you can say about this through your questioning from the bench, and really just maintaining a sense of ethics in yourself, and as well as anyone that is either your staffer or clerk. And I think you foster that sense of dignity and ethics by example.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, if somebody wants to find more information out about you, your campaign, anything else you've got going on, where can they reach out? Where can they find it?
Yeah, so I just got the official nomination from LP
Mm-hmm.
Texas here a couple weeks ago, and so I'm a little bit behind the eight ball on that. But I'm getting my website pulled up here by the end of the month. But right now they can reach me at my email address is robertsonlegal@gmail.com, or by my Twitter handle, which is on the website.
Great. Great. Jacob, do you have any more questions?
I do have one more question, and this is
Okay.
going to get kind of to the nerdy side of things. But is there a particular recent decision or something that's being considered by the Supreme Court now that not necessarily how you fall on it one way or another, but just something that you think is interesting that might have just been ruled on or something that might be coming up for them to rule on?
So nothing on the Texas Supreme Court right now is coming to mind, but I will say that on February 28th, a local Austin resident, Michael Cargill, he's the owner of Central Texas Gun Works. He actually presented. I spoke with him in some capacity about his case, and we ended up doing an additional briefing. But he actually presented to the Supreme Court of the United States on the issue of bump stocks,
Mm.
right? And the idea that the ATF came out just overnight and said, as of X date, a bump stock, which allows a handgun to become braced against your shoulder or your armpit, I suppose, constitutes a felony because it essentially makes it an assault weapon. As we, with the definition of that being questionable. And he personally funded this, and went straight to the United States Supreme Court. Was able to argue it in front of them, and I've been watching it. I watched the whole argument live, taking notes and so on and so forth. And I'm looking very, very much forward to that decision coming down, because that affects so many gun owners in America, Texas included, and as well as a fundamental principle of going back to that Second Amendment right that I espoused earlier. So I'm watching that with careful eyes.
Great. All right. Well, David, is there anything else that you want to say before we go ahead and end this up?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate the time, and looking forward to a good campaign.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to how you do in November. Rooting for you.
Appreciate it.
Got to get some libertarians elected, so that'll be a great thing.
Absolutely.
Jacob, anything else before we head out?
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining in, and look forward to more videos to come.
Thanks, gentlemen.